Like, let's be honest, hypothetical Vaushite in the comments, hurriedly tabbing away from AO3's race play tag.
Hey, AO3, why do you have this?
Were you really alt-right? Were you at Charlottesville? Were you stalking people on kiwi farms? Were you retweeting libs of TikTok as she threatened child hospitals? Were you the one threatening children's hospitals? Were you actively pedo-jacketing trans women? Or did you just scroll through Twitter nodding along with edgelords? No, Bonnie, we're not doing that today. Put the regular music back on. Don't give me that look, just do it. A couple of years ago, I made a video about the then topical controversy surrounding ContraPoints freely working with violent bigots and getting really sniffy when other trans people thought that was a bad idea. Now, ContraPoints got in trouble at least twice after that, and there was a big blow up when Lindsay Ellis got in trouble for being really sniffy about people complaining about a racist take and rage quit her job, but I never made videos after that despite people in my audience wanting me to. And the reason for that is that this video was the culmination of a lot of frustration with someone I had thought was a progressive ally, whereas all the instances that came later didn't have that same frustration because I no longer felt that either of these people, or any of the people getting in trouble since then, were anything other than performers. So let's talk about that. So back in 2019, there was a storm in a teacup when ContraPoints did a video with Buck Angel, a notorious trans medicalist. This was coming off the heat of several years of ContraPoints engaging in what I like to call J.K. Rowling politics, where she views conservatives as sincere but wrong and progressives as dishonest and hiding an agenda. I feel it's a little more nuanced than that, Lil. Yeah, but that's the general gist of it, otherwise we'd be here all day. While the version of this story Wynn's remaining fanbase tends to go with is that she was cancelled for a single mistake, people had been growing increasingly discontented with her for a long time. And the problem is that we all just ostensibly assumed that because she was a trans woman, that she was as much of a true lefty socialist as the rest of us, and ignored her when she made it clear that she wasn't. And this has been a recurring theme regarding much of Breadtube for a long time. Breadtube was viewed as this resurgence of left-wing YouTube in the face of a rising issue of right-wing debate bro channels. This happened because they started out with making fun of the likes of Davis Arini, Thunderfoot, and Sargon of Akkad, who were relatively easy targets for anyone to make fun of.
Oh, of course he has a trilby, of course, why wouldn't he? I mean, what else would you hang on your novelty toy skull? $15,000?
Now, I feel like I and the rest of my video-watching compatriots kind of jumped the gun. Making fun of conservatives is easy. Hell, conservatives could make fun of conservatives before they all got obsessed with things getting woke. This wasn't a difficult thing to do, and while a handful of Breadtubers have largely stayed on the path of leftist politics, those tend to be the ones for whom they were a genuinely held passion. But even they aren't immune to criticism, and even they don't have perfect leftist theory. For the rest, it always came down to the inevitable push and pull between ostensibly leftist politics and content farming for money. LeftTube was similar to the cartoon community in that on YouTube it's a relatively niche environment with only a handful of standouts. There can only be one H-Bomber guy or Phantom Strider, and the rest mostly mill about picking up the scraps. And I say this as a proud scrap picker myself. But what inevitably happens when a community of content creators establishes itself is that everyone comes in looking for their little piece of the clout pie. There's a common discussion nowadays regarding debating the alt-right, or rather, just the right. People will say that it helps debunk conservative thought, but that's always been a very tenuous leg to stand on. It's what conservatives used to say about debating feminists and what atheists used to say about debating creationists. You can't destroy a school of thought by owning one guy with facts and logic. If you could, they would have died out a long time ago. It's that old Steven Universe problem where you have an extremely simplistic solution to a problem, and yet you simultaneously believe it's so complicated that you're the first person to think about it. Ben Shapiro is not the supreme leader of fascism, but that doesn't stop everyone debating him 17 times a day. Why? Because it's easy. It's easy content. It's an easy content farm. You don't have to do much and you don't have to be very smart. And that's the debate bro grift. It's always been the debate bro grift. But the problem is that any audience who likes debates as content won't stick around for the same easy targets, so instead they have to make more reaches. Ian Kuczynski made a name for himself debating the alt-right in an extremely edgy fashion, utilizing slurs and large screaming declarations. But as his audience became increasingly bored of it, he had to branch out. The problem was he didn't really have a praxis outside of class reductionism and calling people Nazis, and when he did branch out, he ended up just calling people Nazis. Any concept that was more complicated to him than Nazis bad, working class good would inevitably be filtered through increasingly unhinged hypotheticals to worm the subject back to that framework. Most infamously when he screeched accusations of white genocide at a black woman sight unseen for arguing about land back, which is the return of stolen land to indigenous people, which, if you live in the United States or Canada right now, is the land currently under your feet. This has been a running problem with Ian in that when it comes to white people, he wants all that ooh-woo democratic socialism, but when it comes to anyone else, he's usually all about mass ethnic cleansing. Jewish people living on stolen land and doing ethnic cleansing, he wants to nuke the civilians. White people living on stolen land and doing ethnic cleansing, well, stopping him from doing that is hurting him specifically, so he doesn't like that. This class-first socialism has always been extremely vulnerable to this kind of white supremacist thinking. And make no mistake, Ian is a white supremacist. You can make all the ooh-woo wise of the proletariat speeches you want, accusing people of color of wanting to genocide white people or suggesting that there's merit to the conspiracy theory that Jewish people control global banking is pretty fucking telling.
If you're too young, those are both things she did.
Ian is a grifter. He does all of this for content and money. He isn't very smart, he isn't politically motivated, and he's a very emotionally stunted white man with all of the opinions of someone who didn't get beaten up enough in high school. But because he sometimes says all the right socialist words that would have been considered radical back in the Gilded Age, he got to enjoy a position of clout among the rest of LeftTube, who have largely ignored his fascist leanings. I have always been a big proponent of understanding the difference between stated politics and actual politics. Ian's Wikipedia page has to clarify his politics as self-described left-wing. That's how bad he is at being left-wing. We all just have to take his word for it most of the time. Give people enough time, they'll show you who they are. You just have to stop ignoring it. See, the thing about ContraPoints' flagrant courting of right-wing figureheads like Buck Angel and Blair White and the deriding of trans people pushing for visibility as radicals is that ContraPoints was doing what a lot of breadtubers do, positioning where she was politically, philosophically, and socially as the Overton window and everything to the left of her as radicals and hyper-woke. And she ultimately refuses to budge from there. This is the fundamental problem of most of Breadtube. They position where they are as peak leftism and everything else is either the far right or a woke distraction. Many of them are only tenuously leftist and many of them hold far right views, but they also don't like capitalism. Indeed, much of Breadtube is of the opinion that opposing capitalism is the only real leftist priority and everything else is a distraction, which doesn't work because any leftist policy that doesn't prioritize anti-racism is just conservatism with a hammer and sickle. And the crux of the response to most of the criticism of ContraPoints was largely people telling ContraPoints that she needs to start caring about how other people think and feel, and ContraPoints going,
"But like, I don't wanna, you know?"
This was someone who, like Ian, was largely only leftist because we assumed this of her, and even she would contest that and say, nah, I'm like more of a centrist. And a lot of her more out there videos, particularly Envy, came off more and more like she was superimposing her own experiences with gender and capitalism onto everybody. This is clearly a woman who has developed a taste for the finer things in life and generally wants to be a part of upper society, and there's nothing inherently wrong with that. Socialism has long had to contend with the fact that a lot of people in it just want to have the means to survive, while a lot of other people look on at the wealthy with searing envy. But that latter group is never going to be happy because that opulent wealth just can't exist without an exploitative system to surround it. Socialism isn't about making everyone wealthy, it's about making everyone stable. But this performative approach to wealth and opulence is a blinder, especially if you make a six-figure salary. This is doubly so for gender. Like every wannabe philosopher, ContraPoints tends to assume that there's a deep-seated philosophical reason in non-binary people's existence because, well, she's got a lot of deep-seated contradictory feelings about gender, surely everyone does. This rather infamous clip is rather telling in that regard.
So the polite thing to do here is easy. If someone asks you to call them they, you call them they.
But if you're like me, you don't want to just do a thing because you dogmatically believe it's the woke thing to do.
God, you're pretentious.
The truth of the matter is that using someone's pronouns doesn't really have a why outside of because I said so. It's like asking the reason you should use someone's name. I'm a proponent of what I call totalitarian gender. Essentially, someone's gender, name, pronouns, etc. aren't up for debate. They are for an individual to dictate on whatever weird whims they desire. If they want their pronoun to be anomaly, then anomaly pronoun is anomaly. End of discussion. In that framework, the only reason why you're using they, them pronouns for someone is because it's polite and there is literally nothing else to call them. And there really isn't a deeper reason for that. There might be to that person, but you shouldn't need that explanation and you aren't owed it. Cis people don't have to justify their own existence like this. The gender binary isn't this all-encompassing thing. Really, only Europe ever cared about it, and every other culture had their own idea about gender in the first place. Thanks, colonialism. But gender as a construct has only ever been this important thing because cis people made it an important thing. It's cis people having a huge bug up their ass about gender nonconformity in the first place that made gender a big deal. It's like that old question of, why is there gay pride but no straight pride? Because nobody's trying to kill you, that's why. Why is there Black Lives Matter but no White Lives Matter? Because nobody's trying to kill you, that's why. If they weren't trying to kill us, it wouldn't be a big thing. People would just be trans and that's it. It would be no more nuanced or complicated than,
do I want to be happy the rest of my life or miserable?
And this idea that there's more to it than just being polite to other human beings is a form of privilege. It's putting the existence of non-binary people up for debate. Even if you are ostensibly in favor of non-binary people, you shouldn't be having that debate with anyone at all. There shouldn't be an option to not be in favor of non-binary people. These are not people to be debated at all. This is not a position to be debated. My identity is not a democracy. It's not a matter of opinion. It is a totalitarian state. I will tell you what my name and pronouns are, and disagreement is not an option if you like having all of your teeth. And this is the case for everyone. Disagreement with an individual's identity is not an opening for debate. It is not an opening for fierce opposition. They are not to be entertained. They are to be shunned and alienated entirely. There is no philosophical explanation for trans people more nuanced than they exist. Their existence is not to be debated for sport. And that's what all of this is. It's sport. That's why breadtubers put so much stock in debating the alt-right, because that's their sport. Their audience isn't here for active participation in politics, they're here for professional wrestling. They're here to see people fight. They're here to see what stupid fucking costume they're gonna put on this time. And you know, that's fine if you remember what it is you're actually doing and what you're actually here for, and your political discussions are more esoteric and pie in the sky, like democratic socialism versus social liberalism, rather than debating people's inherent right to exist. Not every content creator is politically driven, even if their content is technically political, and their audience probably isn't either. When Ian gets in trouble for spewing white supremacist rhetoric for the 18th time that day, there's no shortage of people rushing to talk about how he de-radicalized them from the alt-right, but did he though? Like, let's be honest, hypothetical Vaushite in the comments, hurriedly tabbing away from AO3's race play tag. Hey, AO3, why do you have this? Were you really alt-right? Were you at Charlottesville? Were you stalking people on kiwi farms? Were you retweeting libs of TikTok as she threatened child hospitals? Were you the one threatening children's hospitals? Were you actively pedo-jacketing trans women? Or did you just scroll through Twitter nodding along with edgelords? In my experience, nobody on the alt-right who was politically engaged were ever de-radicalized by Breadtube. They were passive, conservative, but probably couldn't be bothered to vote. Someone who might have voted for Trump, but their show was on that day, so And they were just as politically passive when they moved left. They changed none of their opinions, they didn't drop the edgelord bullshit about cancel culture, they didn't do anything. Maybe they whined on Twitter about woke scolds because woke scolds were making it harder to believe they were really shifting left, but to be de-radicalized, you had to have been radicalized in the first place. And if you were, actual de-radicalization takes way more therapy and way more self-reflection than watching a loser in his gaming chair scream at black women over opinions they never actually held. Breadtubers will claim to be recruiting, but aside from the fact that recruiting Nazis is completely counterproductive, they aren't recruiting for anything except their Patreons. This is not your political engagement, this is your entertainment. This is a borrowed observation from Signified B-Sides. You should definitely watch his videos.
The thing that debate fans don't want to admit is that this is their entertainment. They're trying to validate repeatedly debating insert white supremacists here for a week straight to say that's an important thing to do, when no, you just like wrestling. You just like professional wrestling. You just like soap operas.
If everyone who claimed to be de-radicalized by Breadtube was honest with themselves and everyone else, they would respond to ContraPoints or Vaush posting a new video or stream with, "Oh, quiet everyone, Yana's gotta watch your stories," like my grandmother with Days of Our Lives, or my mother with Lois and Clark. They might like to believe that they're part of a leftist movement, but when was the last time they did anything that wasn't dogpiling someone on Twitter? Most likely over nothing. As much as many of these people talk about recruiting, they're not recruiting for anything but their own fan bases. While I compared them to the cartoon community, I find a better parallel is between Breadtube and psychology channels. While you can find resources and directions for psychology and therapy on YouTube, you will also find a lot of content farm clickbait doing little more than using the language of psychology for clicks, and especially drama channels who just want to call people sociopaths and armchair diagnose people they don't like. And navigating that and knowing who is real and who is a fucking charlatan or just a novelty product is important. Breadtube has the same dichotomy. There are card-carrying socialists, but there's also just a lot of edgelords cashing in on a trend and a lot of actual socially hostile people who bully others for clout. But there's this real problem where if you expect a self-described socialist to uphold socialist ideals, you get called a woke scold and get dogpiled by Nazis. This isn't a tangible leftist movement, and I don't say that derisively. While LeftTube can occasionally do some real good, simply watching YouTubers, especially edgy brocialists who use radical politics as an excuse to avoid analyzing their ingrained biases, isn't going to make you into a good card-carrying leftist. It just feeds politics into the fandom cycle where stan culture melts your brain, where you form parasocial relationships with political commentators. To bring this out into the real world, you should never get emotionally attached to a politician. They are disposable by nature. I didn't vote for the Liberal Party in the last 2 elections because of what nice, honest, moral people they were. They weren't. I voted for them because they mostly match my overall political goals, and unlike the other 3, were actually capable of keeping the Conservative Party from taking power and fucking everyone over. And yeah, my politics line up with the NDP way more than the Liberals, but the NDP spends so much time fucking around and engaging catty teenage bullshit and making themselves less and less electable. And if I were someone who cared about ideological purity and routinely called everything less than socialist than me neoliberal, I'd probably consider that a problem. But because I don't have an emotional attachment to politicians, and I know what the actual positions of these parties are, it's much easier to make the more grown-up strategic decision. Politics and fandom should never mix, and while Breadtube is mostly just politics as entertainment, it is increasingly breeding this self-centered, egotistical version of socialism in its viewers, simply by virtue of the fact that many card-carrying socialist content creators have inoculated their viewers to be violently opposed to anyone who pressures them to actually uphold socialist values. The end result is people who view politics not as a strategic move on a chessboard, but as a declaration of your own moral goodness. And this parasocial relationship with political commentators goes both ways. Parasocial hatred of these people is not useful in any way, shape, or form. It all creates engagement, especially for professional trolls. While I deeply dislike them, I can't summon the fire to be angry at creators like Contradiction, Nostalgia Chick, or Ian Learn to Shave. Couldn't even summon the energy to think up original insults there. Everything about them is so mundane, and their actions are so predictable, especially when they glommed onto the right's cancel culture nonsense. See, when all this Buck Angel stuff was happening, ContraPoints ended up doing a Patreon stream that went over the backlash, very dismissively of course, but what did you expect? And the reason I bring it up is because during the stream, she made the remark that just because trans people were offended when she worked with transphobes wasn't a good enough reason for her to stop. And it's a poignant moment because it's the point where I realized doing another video on ContraPoints' bullshit was kind of ContraPointless. It made it clear that there was nothing to gain from pressing the issue. There were no minds to change, just flag her on Shinigami eyes and move on. But it did make something finally click. Namely that ContraPoints ultimately was never interested in being a creator who went to bat for trans people. What she wanted to do was pontificate on the academic hypotheticals of political concepts. You know that image you think of when you think of philosophy, of 2 Roman guys debating like it's a sport while a crowd gathers around them? That's all this is to most of Breadtube. ContraPoints cared about what cishet people think of her and did not care what trans people thought of her. She fundamentally did not care until what they thought of her became annoying. And that's why her response to the backlash was so shit. Because she didn't care about mending a rift, she just wanted those little brats to shut up and leave her alone. She'd already decided who she wanted her content to appeal to, and if she wasn't dissuaded by thousands of people ostracizing her and giving her a mountain of headaches, another video from a nobody wasn't going to do that. The fact is, there isn't some secret mystery as to why this wealthy, conventionally attractive white woman is so hostile to criticism. She just doesn't care. She would rather just dress up like she's in a Family Guy skit about gay Dracula and contemplate her navel. And I don't say this with any malice. ContraPoints isn't the first white woman with middling talent, deep self-loathing, and an adversarial relationship with criticism, reality, and the concept of other people's existence, and she won't be the last. It is a mundane fact of life, and when you look at her work through this lens, it's a lot harder to be angry with her, because she's just another white girl with bad opinions. But she did get me thinking about who I want my content to appeal to, because I don't want neo-Nazis liking my channel or my writing. I go out of my way to be as hostile to them as possible. Some people whine about this, saying I should be reaching out and helping de-radicalize them, but the fact is,
But like, I don't wanna, you know?
I just don't care about conservative white men and their problems. Because to be that kind of person, I'd have to be someone that other LGBT people don't feel safe around. And I'd have to be someone that people of color don't feel safe around. And I don't want to be that kind of person. If I'm going to choose between conservative white men or choose LGBT people and people of color, I'm going to choose the latter. Am I good at that? Not really. I put my foot in my mouth on more than one occasion over my long career. Some people have forgiven me for those instances, some haven't, and I'm okay with people still being upset with me for that. I might not be the kind of creator I want to be right now, but being that kind of creator is the only real professional ambition I have, and I care way more about that than potentially detoxing Nazis. At the end of the day, I'm not a political YouTuber any more than all art is political, but I still care about who my content is appealing to. Anything that might make those groups feel unwelcome in my spaces or around my work is not something I'm okay with. And I have tried to adopt a policy over the last few years that if another marginalized person comes to me with something racist I've done, to not argue with them on that point because they have a better understanding of the subject than you do, you fucking idiot. I tend to take a hard and fast rule on how to respond when marginalized people confront me with something problematic I've done, unless it is brazenly 100% clear that they're doing so in bad faith. I think if anything, if someone is bringing something you've done to your attention, rather than make a clickbait YouTube video about it, that's generally an indication that they already trust you to take it seriously. They already believe it's a sincere mistake. They're already giving you the benefit of the doubt. They wouldn't be talking to you otherwise. And I think that's the only real value that these discussions of Breadtube personalities getting in trouble for refusing to check their privilege has. Sit back and think, who do you want feeling welcome around you? Who do you actually care about? And do you care about being a welcoming person, having better politics, or at the very least just not being repugnant? Or do you just want people to declare you one of the good ones without doing any of the actual work? I've always been firmly of the correct opinion that cancel culture isn't real, despite how many white liberals start to adopt the term whenever they get slapped down for being stupid. ContraPoints and Lindsay Ellis weren't canceled for one bad tweet or action. The both of them had been pissing people off with a very distinct callousness for a long time. Hell, Ellis's last big controversy is often said to be about a single tweet that was perceived to be racist, but it wasn't even that. It was the response to being very plainly told why the tweet was racist. Some people came to her in good faith, she called them crazies and lashed out, and a larger group of people went, oh, okay, fuck you too, I guess. And it wasn't the first time this had happened. People made a big fuss about the pylon because hundreds of people were making these remarks, but she had far more defenders than she had detractors. And this is the natural consequence of having a huge audience. When you show your ass, more people see it. And this goes double for Natalie. They did not get canceled, they got shouted down, and not for one offense, for many. If I threw out the idea of Raylo-style fanfiction with Harriet Tubman, I'd expect people to be less patient with me too. Cancel culture isn't real. And when I say that, people get surprised because unlike these two, I actually have been stalked and harassed and have my reputation slandered by bad faith actors en masse. Like, Lily, how can you not believe cancel culture is real? You've been stalked for a decade, you've had your name put on manuscripts that aren't yours, you've been accused of abuse by your abuser, one former friend has been stalking you for 8 years, you've been assaulted IRL over some of this shit, some crazy bitch is making her 5th video in a row trying to pedo jacket you like a store brand libs of TikTok as we fucking speak. How is this not an attempt to cancel you? Well, it's pretty simple. I don't call this canceling. I call it what it is. Harassment. Bullying, stochastic terrorism in the case of the 2 people who raped me over this bullshit. The whole point of cancel culture is that when people are being actually criticized over things they actually did, you will connect that legitimate criticism, shouty and rude as it might be, to those other things. Cancel culture is about blurring the line between criticism and harassment so that when you see the former, you will think it's automatically the latter. You cannot equate 12 years of stalking, abuse, defamation, real-life sexual assault, and very deliberate attempts to ruin someone's life out of spite to being made fun of on Twitter for a week for being fucking stupid. And I've been made fun of on Twitter for being fucking stupid, and I don't count it when I talk about being stalked and terrorized. That's why I don't believe in cancel culture. I don't need to, because I don't view my ego being bruised as an act of psychological assault. This video went in a lot of different places. I just started writing and a lot of very personal frustrations came out. Hopefully that was intelligible, but knowing me, it probably wasn't. I wasn't prepared for this one winning the poll, honestly. I meant what I said a minute ago. I don't really hold any anger toward terrible creators in LeftTube, not even the ones who have harassed me specifically. It all just kind of bleeds together into a big blinding blob. Like, I don't hate ContraPoints. She's a white woman with terrible opinions about shit. There's a ton of those. While disliking or disavowing creators is valuable, I think there's a lot of harm to yourself when you get emotionally invested in a creator's downfall. Personally, I would love it if a lot of Breadtube checked their own biases got away from making verbal wrestling matches and drama videos, but I don't see any value in holding my breath. I guess I could suggest lefty YouTubers who I think are more worth watching. Yeah, let's do that. In that case, Signified B-Sides for more direct political theory. It's a mixture on current trends, direct politics, and pop culture. I think he's very good. You might like him. Stitch Media Mix is more centered directly on fandom, K-pop, and fandom racism, but if you're looking to have your biases checked right to the face with a wooden cutting board, they were very helpful to me. Sometimes I come away from Stitch's articles being made aware of something problematic I've been doing and feeling ashamed of myself. And I think that experience is more valuable than people give it credit for. Professor Flowers, in particular, she has a very insightful video about the problems of LeftTube trying to recruit Nazis, and I've kept his video in my mind while I was writing parts of this, but all of her other videos are great, and honestly, I think he's just swell. And lastly, Knowing Better. It's a mostly history channel, which YouTube already loves, but also talks about other issues like the capitalist hellhole we're living in, police militarization. It's a left-wing channel that doesn't do class reductionism, which is what I think you should be primarily looking for. Alright, I'm tired, I'm going to bed. Have a good night, I love you all. Yes, even you in the back, sharpening a knife and glaring at me.